Okay, so I think we'll get going. So good morning, everyone. Excuse me, and welcome to Navigating COVID-19 webinar today. I'm Cindy Mann, Member and Business Development Specialist at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce and your host for this morning. The signage is everywhere, competing for our attention, and today's webinar is all about the science of it all. So from the moment we leave the house, we're exposed to thousands of signs every day. Signs in all forms compete with our attention, whether they're providing us with information or to drive action. So our speakers are here today to discuss the importance of placement, the design, and the branding of our signs, and how people can interact with them. So I'm happy to introduce today our guests, Amy Goman and Gary Cox. Amy is the Director of Business Development for the Printing House and self-appointed Cool Spaces guru with an expertise in helping businesses and brands professionally and effectively communicate visually with their clients. Gary Cox from the Barrington Consulting is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Gary supports both the province of Nova Scotia and the Halifax Regional Municipality in training and deploying Lean Six Sigma and performance excellence principles and coaching Lean Six Sigma Green Belts. So thank you both for joining us today, and now over to you both.
Thank you, Cindy. I wanted to say thank you to Sandra as well for having Gary and I today. And on behalf of Gary and myself, we want to thank everybody for choosing to share a part of your day with us today.
Absolutely.
So without further ado, we're going to get this party started. So just to share a couple of goals of what we're going to be talking about today is we really want to provide the confidence in decision making when it comes to signage, and also to provide information that can be immediately and easily applied to your business and space. So to quickly run through the agenda, we've got a little bit of webinar housekeeping. Thank you, Cindy, for introduction. So we'll skip over that, and then we've got a little disclaimer. We're going to then talk about just identifying risks and common areas to think about, followed by how we evaluate those risks and identifying countermeasures. And then we're going to dig into what I call the fun stuff, which is the impact of signage.
Hey.
And then I'm going to go over some real world examples, some of the wins and failures, and then there's some tools that you have available to you to use at your discretion anytime after this. And then we'll do a question period. So just some housekeeping, for how we're going to communicate with each other today. There's the chat box at the bottom. If you take your mouse all the way to the bottom of the screen, you're going to see that there is the chat box option or the raise hand option. And then also there's the Q&A. So if you have some questions, you're more than welcome to put them in there, and then we will address them at the end. So we're going to skip over the fun stuff. And so here's where we want to learn a little bit more about you. You've learned about us. So if we're able to launch the industry poll, that would be fantastic. So we're just curious as to what industries that each of you work in. Would love to just learn more about who we've got on the call with us today. So we'll take a second, just a couple seconds to go through this. Okay, if there's a way that we can share the poll. All right, so it looks like we've got some healthcare, legal, tourism, real estate, and other. That's exciting. Thank you so much for participating. It's very interesting that, it seems like the big groups of industries that are going gangbusters these days are the ones that have been kind of going on since the beginning. So it's nice to see, that we've got some real estate's been going crazy this month, or I guess July, and then healthcare, obviously legal and tourism. So welcome everybody. Okay. So Gary, I'm going to let you, I'm going to pass this over to you, and then we're going to run through your
Yeah, so thanks very
expertise.
much, Amy. Appreciate it. So we want to make a bit of a disclaimer, and that really is that we're not health experts. We have our expertise. Amy, of course, in signage and signage production and effectiveness of making sure your signage gets the message across to your to the people using your space, and I have an expertise in the whole idea of visual management, and which brings the Lean Six Sigma piece to the pie. But we really want you to follow the healthcare instructions of the provincial authorities and the healthcare authorities. Use their guidelines as your guiding principles in conjunction with some of the things that we're going to be sharing with you today. So yeah, just a bit of a disclaimer from us. So I guess let's. Another thing that Amy and I would like to know about is what are your areas of concern? How concerned are you, or do you think that your employees are about coming into your workspace? Maybe your clients or customers. So there's some concerns. Just to take a check and click one of this. Not concerned, mildly concerned, moderately concerned, very concerned, or don't want to go anywhere until there's a vaccine. So where do you or your staff or your patrons fall? And when we'll give you 10 or 15 seconds to answer that, and then maybe Sandra or Cindy can launch the results of that poll. Let's have a look. Okay, some results still coming in. And there we go. And here we go. Okay, interesting. So we got 40% of you mildly concerned, another 40% at moderately concerned, and we have a couple of folks who are, very concerned. And I think that, all of those reactions are quite natural. I think, we've been going at this for almost 6 months now. So we think about, maybe we're getting a little less concerned, or maybe because of the fact that we've got some complacency potentially coming into play, that our anxiety or our concern increases. So we've got to make these considerations, and this is where effective signage and understanding the risks associated within your space become important factors, which is kind of what we want to talk about. So closing that poll and moving on. There's really, three things that we want to think about when it comes to getting back into the workplace, and that is that you obviously want to mitigate or eliminate any risk of virus spread, COVID-19 spread, as it relates to that, and that you're doing that by implementing either new protocols, new behaviors. You're wanting people's behaviors to change, and we're already seeing that with mask wearing, for example. It's common. I was just talking about prior to the start how common it is for people to be seen wearing masks now out in public spaces, and that wasn't something that we used to see before. We want to instill confidence in our employees, our visitors, our customers to our workspace or to our places of business. We want them to feel that they know that you care about their safety, and that you've done what you can to ensure that happens. And of course, whatever behaviors you're putting in place, I just use the term complacency. We want to make sure we don't fall into a state of complacency. And that means that we need to sustain these new behaviors, and we don't fall back into old behaviors, or we may have to introduce new behaviors even beyond the ones we currently have. So thinking about that. And so when we prepare our workplace, there's a couple of things we need to think about. We need to identify and evaluate the risks associated with where we're going and where people are interacting. We need to evaluate those risks. We need to then develop some mitigation or countermeasures associated to the level of risk. So lower the risk, lower the mitigation, higher the risk, higher the mitigation, and so on. And then we really need to create an action plan or a communication strategy associated with those. So let's dig right into sort of the area of risk, which is a kind of an area that I work with as well. So we have this tool in Lean Six Sigma, and those of you who don't know what Lean Six Sigma is, it's simply a methodology or approach to addressing problems. That's the short term of it. And one of those tools is called a spaghetti diagram, and it's not complicated. You can do it on a napkin if you want to, and that's simply you draw out your space. and you identify the traffic flow, meaning where people are going to be moving around inside of that space. And here, for example, we've got a typical office space, and each of those lines represents a different employee or a different customer or a different client coming into the workspace. And what you'll see here, for example, is everybody comes in through that main door, and then you'll see they move about inside the office, and you've got the washrooms, you got the photocopier room, you got the kitchen, you've got some general office space, you got a file cabinet space, maybe an IT space, and so on. And what you do is you draw literally, that's what I call a spaghetti diagram. You draw a line and follow the route of each of the stakeholders or the people that enter in your space. And then you look at that space and you say, where are the people have the greatest risk of interface with each other? And that becomes the little starbursts that I have there. And then you have some other areas that you just might want to think cautionary about. So that's the first thing we want to do. Identify the bottlenecks, identify common pathways. Where are people most likely to interact with each other? And then we need to think about that. So this kind of brings us to some common areas. And when we think about this is we got three here. We got common spaces, right? We have the office area spaces, and we have these customer facing spaces. All of these spaces become places that you need to think about as it relates to if you're going to get people moving inside of that space. So looking at that list, we're going to launch another poll, and I'm going to ask you, what three areas of your business or your place are you most concerned about as it relates to people interacting? So let's kind of think about I'll call them the hot spots. Where do you anticipate, the hot spots to be? I know that, most people probably have, they know, off the top of their head where their biggest challenges are, but sometimes mapping them out the way that I propose there in the spaghetti diagram reveals something that you may not have thought of. I think of, for example, the photocopier room or the information technology room, or, if you're in a grocery store or a restaurant, maybe there's an area that the staff visit that the public don't, that you haven't really thought about, that kind of thing. Okay, when you're ready, and we think we have most of the participants have participated, we can launch the results of that poll. That would be awesome. Amy and I are quite curious about your areas of concern. Okay, interesting. Exits and entrants. 36% of you feel that, and that's pretty obvious. A pretty obvious one, because everybody comes and goes from those places. So things like that become one. So lunchroom, again, somebody identified the lunchroom as one. Elevators are pretty common, and of course meeting rooms. So a little bit spread out, but this is where a spaghetti diagram can really help you. So once you've identified some areas, you want to sort of take that information and evaluate the risks. So we'll close that poll out, and then I'll talk a little bit about the risk factors. So when we want to think about evaluating risk, and this, what I'm about to do may sound awful mathematical, and you think, oh man, okay, why do we have to do all this? This is a tool that, if you would care to have it, we can provide it to you. It's an Excel spreadsheet that you just simply type in the information and you can use it. You don't need to do this in this format as detailed as I've done it here. I'm a little bit kind of how I'm wired. But the first thing you want to do is you think about the space, and you say, what are the factors associated with risk? Well, first of all, the number of people using that space in a single use. You talked about a boardroom. How many people can you fit in the boardroom? If you can fit 15 people in the boardroom, it's a big greater risk than if you can only fit 3 people in the boardroom. The number of square feet per person when you're using that space. Obviously, if you're thinking about physical distancing, the greater number of square feet that you have, the more likely you are to be able to actually create that physical distance between you and the other person. Number of shared items, photocopier room. I mentioned the photocopier room. How many people are going to be picking up the stapler every day? Little common things like that. Cleaning frequency is another thing that you would want to consider. You know, how often, if I pick up the stapler and the stapler is somebody cleaning it after every time that they use it, or do I clean it before I pick it up? You know, how often are you cleaning either the equipment or the space that you're using? And of course, in common areas, it's the number of interactions between individuals. Some of you mentioned entrances, for example, and exits. Really, you know, a lot of interactions happen there, so that would do that. So once you've identified those areas or those factors, what you need to do is then weight those and simply do that. So you create this weighting, and that's what you'll see here. You say it's much more important, for example, for me to think about the number of square feet per person if I'm creating a physical distance as a mitigation than it might be, for example, the frequency of cleaning. Right, the stapler may not have to be cleaned, with every use. Maybe you just simply tell people, hey, you can use your own staplers, or you simply clean it at the end of every day, or something like that. So you weight those out of 100, and you say which ones are the most important ones to me. Once you've done that, you kind of have to create this bit of a legend, and this legend supports the weighting. So, for example, I say, you know, the number of square feet per person during use. What you'll see here is on the legend number 2, I'll say it's 100 square feet, 100 divided by the square foot per person. So okay, that sounds complicated, but it's not really. If I have an 8 by 10 room, right, and that's 4 8s of 32, that's, you know, 320 square feet. With 320 square feet, what do I do with 320 square feet? How many people can I fit in this space and create physical distancing? That's really kind of what we're doing here. So we're creating this legend. As it creates to the number of people using the space, simply do that. And what we do is we then enter simply a score. We say, what's the score? So here I'm talking about the boardroom. Somebody had mentioned the boardroom as a risk. So we have a boardroom at Barrington, and it's a 20 by 20 room, has 12 chairs in it. And so that's 400 square feet or so. And so you would say, how many 12 chairs? I got 400 square feet. So that's, three per square foot. That means a score of 12. I weight that as a score of 12. And I do that for each of these categories. And I'm going through this fast, but the spreadsheet does it for you. And you'll see ranking. And in this case, in the case of Barrington, the kitchen area, because it's a small space and holds 3 people, it ranked as the number 1 place that we need to address as it relates to the risks associated with that. And you'll see the top 4 there as I've got them listed.
I think just to jump in, one of the things I know, Gary, when you've been talking about this, that I think of immediately are the places of businesses that I've gone into where you see there's a sign outside that says max number of X number of people. And so I think it's through this exercise that based on their square footage that they've realized, okay, so we can have 2 people in the store at any one time or 4 people in the store at any one time to ensure that there's always that constant ability to have the proper space between people. So I think, this is a great way to figure out the number of people. And so it's a fantastic tool to use for sure.
Great. No, thank you, Amy. And you're absolutely right. I appreciate you coming in on that, because that's exactly right. So once you've identified those areas of risk, then the next thing you want to do is think about the mitigation of those risks or the countermeasures to those risks. And there's, again, in Lean Six Sigma, we teach that there's 3 ways to sort of think about error proofing or countermeasuring challenges when you face them. The first one is to eliminate it completely. So you error proof, so you make it so it's not even possible to have that interaction. That would be the ideal, right? The next one is you create what we call standard work. So we're going to talk about the standard work in a second. And the third one is visual management, which is really where Amy's expertise is as it relates to signage, which is why we've kind of paired up and been delivering this message. So let's think about the kitchen, which I told you at Barrington, the kitchen was the number 1 area of concern. Well, the first thing you can do is to error-proof it is simply close the kitchen. Kitchen's not going to be available. People have to bring their own lunch. People have to think about how they're going to, eat cold food versus hot food because the microwave's not going to be available, whatever. You can simply do that. Having people work from home, having people adjust their lunchtime breaks will mitigate how many people are there at any one time. Maybe you sort of schedule, hey, your time in the kitchen is from 12 to 12:10. Your time in the kitchen is from 12:10 to 12:20, and so on. So you could create that. Again, you're error proofing that space. The next example as it relates to standard work is there's 3 levels of standard work that you need to think about inside of your organization. The first one is the individual employee. What do I need to do as an employee or as a client or as a customer? What do I need to do? The second level is what we call interaction. So interaction with coworkers. So in your workspace, you're interacting with your coworkers. So what do you guys need to do to sort of help each other? And then the third one of interaction, of course, is with visitors and guests, people who may be coming to your place for the first time, only once, or maybe they're infrequent visitors to your space. You need to think about those 3 levels of standard work as you deploy these countermeasures. So thinking of standard work level 1, we talk about employees. So we've already got some of these practices in place. You've got, hand sanitizer available, and you tell your employees to sanitize on their way in and on their way out. You make sure that the signage is there. Maybe you have a policy and you have them read it and sign off that they've understood the new policy as it relates to the health regulations. Maybe you put it in and say, hey, as an employee, your job is to wipe down the stapler before you use it. That's what you can do personally, wipe down the stapler. So those would be, we consider level 1. Level 2 inside the kitchen, and I use the staplers not in the kitchen, but the sink of utensils. But level 2 inside the kitchen is we have to think about each other. So when I approach the kitchen, if I see somebody's in the kitchen, I'm not going to go in there, right? We have this policy of 1 at a time in there. We make sure that people are wearing their personal protective equipment. So we make sure that there's masks available, or we make sure the hand sanitizer is there, and so on. So we make sure that that's available, and the policy is that we're going to protect each other by wearing this equipment. And then, of course, we could simply have a sign-in, sign-out policy. So in other words, when you go into a space, you sign in that you were in that space and that you've cleaned that space before you leave, and you sign out. And we see this often inside of washrooms on the back of doors. People just have this checklist and they sign off that they've done a certain protocol to the washrooms before you leave. The third level is interaction with each clients or customers that are visiting your space. And so this is where signage starts to come into play a little bit too. So we can have certain things, and you've seen this, signage on the floor that marks clearly, this is entrance, this is exit. And we've seen them on the doors, entrance, exit. We drive the traffic based on that. So strangers coming in don't have to guess what to do or where to go. Again, we can provide personal protective equipment. I know for a long time before it was mandatory, Costco would offer a mask to people as they came in, as an example. And then, of course, you've seen the markings on the floor that tell you to stay certain distances apart. And if you're in a boardroom or in a kitchen area, you might have, hey, this is where this belongs, this is where this belongs, and so on. We would consider that to be part of the practices of good standard work at a level 3. And then we get into visual management. So as it comes to visual management, this is really about physical distancing and ensuring that you make visual the behaviors or the expectations that you have of both employees and visitors to your space. And this supports sort of an organizational cultural shift. It guides people, we call it nudges people in the right behavior. You see that signage, and if you don't do that, if you don't stand on the place that's marked, it's pretty obvious you're standing in the wrong place, right? So that's a form of visual management. And visual management instills confidence in both you as an owner or a leader of a business, but it instills confidence in your customers and your employees that you've set something in place to show that you care about their safety. So that helps sustain that level of discipline. I don't have to always tell people where to stand because I now have a place for them to stand. I don't have to tell people to wear masks because I have a visual picture of somebody with a mask on, and so on and so forth. So this is all part of visual management. So then, of course, once you've said, okay, this is what I'm going to do in the way of countermeasures and mitigation, is you simply start to have to create an action plan. How am I going to implement this? And there are several factors that you need to think about. Who needs to get the message? What message do they need to get? When do they need to get this message? And how am I going to relay this message to them? And you'll see that there's a number of different methods to be able to do that. And so I'm going to sort of turn it back over to Amy, who is the guru of cool spaces. And she's going to talk you through about how you can make your spaces look cool and still get the message across.
So I'm just going to elaborate on my self-titled cool spaces. So it's a title I've asked every, for the longest time to have on my business card, and unfortunately I have not had buy-in as of yet. So, but to me, the Cool Spaces Guru is like any space, the fun that I have on a daily basis and through the printing house or TPH is I get to look at a space just like any of our 72 locations across Canada and the teams that we have in those locations. We all look at a space in a different way. We take a look, yes, there may be walls or a blank piece of paper or a canvas, and we all see something different in terms of what will go onto that. And part of what we do at TPH is to help bring whatever vision you have to light. And so that's where the cool space is, whether it's a piece of paper, a wall, an entire exterior of a building. That's our role in to help creating those visions as a reality. So this is where we get to dabble into the impact of signage, which are things that we love to do, and we've been so fortunate to be involved in. So these are just a few examples of some signage that we've already done this year. I'm sure some of it, with at least the thank yous and the distancing and all that kind of stuff, is familiar. So now we want to learn a little bit more about the impact of signage. So I'm going to share a photo I took of a spot near our, we have a family cottage in Tobermory, Ontario. And I was walking along one day and I was like, okay, well, apparently there's free parking down there, but also apparently you can't park there either. So you can immediately see that signage can be at times very confusing. So signage is everywhere. And when it's done well, it creates a very positive experience. When it's done poorly, as in this case, it can create confusion. And so this was the greatest example I've seen of, absolute signage being counterintuitive to one another. So in signage, we consider 5 key areas: location, location, location. And then I'm going to dive deeper into that. And then we're going to talk about how much size matters. And we'll then move into less being more, and that, at times it's easy to get carried away with text. And then the fact that imagery does in fact win. And then I'll leave this one to think about with respect to the last component in the key area, which means the shoe needs to fit. So I'm not going to dig into that until we get to that point. So under location, 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 I'm going to circle back to what Gary talked about earlier with respect to the spaghetti diagram. And so what's important with signage is to know the traffic flow and where the bottlenecks are happening. And this is where you can really decide where signage actually needs to be positioned. So to elaborate an example of this, the timing in which we actually interact with signage is critical. So in this mock-up you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, it's a beautiful visual. There's a lot of visual cues in this washroom space. You see the floor graphics where you know exactly where to stand and what sinks are available to you to use. You also have the reminder of washing your hands for 20 seconds. Now it's very, very tiny, but at the back of the room, you might be able to see the visual that is on the mirror, which talks about the maximum capacity. So in isolation, if this is the only time that you are seeing the maximum capacity sign, then this timing of when you're interacting with this sign is far too late. You want to be able to know when people are going to have to receive this information on things like maximum capacity, and the timing of when you interact with this sign is too late. So you really would, if you're looking at where you want to spend either money or position of where signage should go, in the absence of having two signs, you would want to position this one outside of the washroom so that as people enter, there's the expectation if they happen to walk in and they see that there's already 3 people in there, there's too many and they're going to need to wait outside. The other thing you need to think about is, you know, where your eye goes is where you go. So you want to be placing signage in spots where it's going to drive natural behaviors with really not having to think too much. So again, we talk about the floor signage. There's the visual cue of the color at the base of the sink, and then the messaging. So it's a natural flow directly to where you need to go. So then we're going to talk about size matters. So the Goldilocks effect is live and real. So I'm going to talk about my little grocery store that's around the corner from me. So this is an example very early on I took this photo in April actually, and they've since changed their signage, which I'm very thankful for. You know, I walked past this sign, I got to the back of the grocery store, and then I was chased down by a store employee saying, you're supposed to take a grocery cart because that's how we control the number of people in and out of the store. So as you can see, based on the sign, it says to our valued customers, thank you for your support. And during this terrible time, we ask that you shop with one of our carts provided. This is how we control the number of carts. So in this single visual that's on an 8.5 by 11, so it's very small, there's a lot of text and a lot of instruction. So if you're not used to interacting with that space, and someone didn't chase you down inside the store to remind you that you needed to go get a cart, you would have missed this completely. So the combination of it being the right size and in the right location is critical here. So if they wanted to share this information, reducing the number of words, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but also the size in which the sign has been made will allow for the message to resonate. And then we have the combination of right size, right location. You have zero confusion. So now we're going to move into the less text is more. So this is where we need to determine what we want to say versus what we need to say. We often think about, you know, the whole scope of, in the case we just saw, there was a lot of sentences and a lot of information, but what we need to be able to do is communicate effectively while people are on the move. So the ability to reduce what you want to say to what you need to say will allow for that communication to resonate faster. Also, anytime you have an opportunity to replace words with shapes and symbols, that will help the process of absorbing that information. And as we know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so combining with text is never a bad thing either. So I'm gonna give you an example of some of the signage that we've made. So in this particular sign, there's a few cues that you can see. The shape of the floor graphic is in your typical stop sign shape. So immediately we have some familiarity there. You have the 2 footprints on the physical sign, which allows you to know, okay, I feel like there's a stop and now I need to put my feet here. And then you have the complementing text that talks about, you know, in case there was any confusion, that you do need to in fact stop. The good thing about visual cues is that no matter what language you speak, those visuals are universal. So regardless of whether you can speak English, French, or any other language, you know, having the visual cues will eliminate confusion. And also it will help with people of a large range of ages. So for kids as well, when they're in and out of spaces, you know, they're able to understand based on the images what they're supposed to be doing at that particular moment. So I realized I skipped over a little component about the Goldilocks effect, and I'll speak to that before I dig into this slide. So one of the things that is very common when it comes to signage is people always assume that bigger means better. That's not always the case. What's important about the size is through something that's called viewing distance. So I'll bring it to now this slide. And you know, you can see through this that there's a lot of visual cues. There's shapes and imagery that let you know where you need to go and where you need to stop. There's this beautiful banner stand that has some critical information before entering the space. But if you notice where the stop visual cue is, it's at a distance that will allow you to be able to read and absorb the information on the banner stand. Now, if that banner stand was miles away or maybe several more feet away, the size of the text and the visual cues would not resonate as much. So that's where things would need to be made bigger. Vice versa, if you're in a space, and I oftentimes use the example of if you're at a large art gallery and there's a giant wall to floor to ceiling painting, and the first time you interact with it, you're standing about a foot away from it, and your ability to absorb the entire image is lost simply because you're physically too close. So viewing distance in these in something of that size and that grandeur, you would need to be able to step back to be able to absorb what the message and what the image is. So we think of those things as well when we're putting up signage. So this is where, again, what point will people be at in terms of distance away from the sign in order for them to understand what your message is a critical aspect of decisions that you make in your own space. So to take it back to this side, simple images and shapes tell a story and they tell it quickly. And then picking the right image and shape is really critical to driving the flow. It also removes guesswork and creates confidence when entering and exiting a space. So to give you an example, in this slide, you know where you enter, where you need to stop, and then what you need to do after you've stopped at the reception desk and how far you need to remain away from the people ahead of you. Also, there's a reminder as you go up the stairs, how many stairs you need to leave between people. And then also on the couch, should you need to rest your feet for a minute, there's designated spots for seating. So all of those visual cues create a lot of confidence. So a few more examples of imagery that really just speaks for itself, that creates that confidence and reminders of what you need to be doing when you're in various spaces. So some of the signage we've already seen really leans on some of the complementary text. You don't always need to be doing the complementary text. These are great visual cues of an open office concept where different colored circles on the floors indicate where people should remain outside when someone's working in that space. So it really creates that confidence not only for the person sitting at that desk, but also for those that have to navigate in between the desks to go from perhaps their office space to kitchen or washroom or anything like that. And here's where the almighty question around what does it mean for the shoe needing to fit. So this is, oftentimes people think that everybody needs the same signage. And I'm sure in all sorts of spaces, you have interacted with signage that, seems to be the same as a lot of other spaces. But what you need is not actually necessarily what your neighbor needs. So at TPH, when you're working with any of our teams, we ask some key questions. We want to understand the purpose of your signage and where it's going, because part of that will help us know the type of materials that need to be involved in creating the solution that's going to work best for you. How long it needs to be in place for, or how long are you expecting it to last, is another component. There's a number of projects that we work on where signage is only needed for a couple of days. So we're going to offer solutions that are, on a temporary basis. There's different levels of materials. And so obviously, as you move into the longer timelines, we're moving into more premium products to ensure that you really have that durability and that lasting effect. And then, the level of traffic is also important. So I can give you an example. I had worked on a project years ago for the Union Station in Toronto, and millions of people flow through that in a relatively short amount of time. And so we needed to be using material that, generally speaking, we wouldn't use for the length of time. So they were doing a promotion for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we were putting some stuff down on the Union Station floor, and it was only going to be down for about a week. However, because the volume of traffic is so high, we had to use something that was going to hold up as though we needed it up there for over a year, just because the interaction with that graphic was so high. If we used anything else, it would have failed. Actually, sorry, I'm not going to use the word fail. Just the wear and tear on it would have been higher, and then it would have needed to be replaced sooner. And then as we discussed before, what makes sense? And then does it ever need to move? So all those questions come into our world when we're trying to ensure that the solution that you need for your space is going to be as effective as possible. So I'm going to talk about some real world examples. And so there's, I know this type of signage isn't necessarily signage that a lot of people actually want to purchase. And we completely understand that, because to be honest, you know, it's never been there before. Why would we want it now? However, just because we've got signage that has to remind us about distance and direction, and that, you know, in this case, the store was open, there's every opportunity to make it beautiful. So in this case, you know, allowing for branding to be applied to this type of signage allows people to be familiar with your brand on another level as well. So a brand is really identified by people's perception of a company's reputation. And reputation is really built by news, social media, and personal interactions with the brand. So branding your signage really creates that memorable and consistent impression. And so here's an example. Again, my poor little grocery store. Now I will tell you, like I said, they have since very much improved. I spoke with the owner and I said, okay, we need to help you out here. You can see that they were under construction and they had an entrance sign. Now I will give them credit. It was at a great height. The size of it was fantastic. Just pencil on a drywall wall, not as effective. You know, they could have just used a Sharpie marker and it would have had more impact. So in this case, is it effective? And does it create a positive experience? And what impression does it leave? I can tell you from watching people come and go, there was quite a bit of confusion. And so for a period of time, some people were a little bit frustrated with the experience they were having, especially during a time that, you know, not only was there the fear of just going to places, but also a store that was under construction. And here's an example of one of the projects that we've done at PartSource. And again, we asked the same question, you know, is it effective? Does it create a positive experience? And what impression does it leave? So as you can see here, you've got your PartSource branding. And immediately you can see, not only in the visual cues, that there's information about how you're going to make a payment, and then also information on the fact that you are not able to enter the store. And also the timing in which you're going to enter that is essentially right at the doors, as you would have entered, that give you all the cues that you need to know what you need to do at that moment upon arriving at that store. And then obviously keeping the PartSource branding and keeping it familiar to people is a positive. Alternatively, we have, again, my little grocery store. And as you can see, within a very short amount of time, you can see off to the left, you can see the little 8.5 by 11 take the cart sign. There's the permits in the window. There's a giant pink board also taped up with information. So there's a lot of visual cues happening in a time where when you step from the curb through those doors, it's only a matter of a few seconds. And so a lot of the information that's being shared at this point is going to be lost. So this is where consolidating your message, using those large images to create those visual cues so that people do know how to act upon interacting with it and entering a space is very critical. A great example of very simple visual cues. It's not COVID signage, but you come up to this location, not only do you know where you are, but you know exactly what direction to go and that you're at the donation center. Some modular signage. So if you have a space where you don't need or want to have things in a permanent spot, or let's say based on, you know, season or location, that you need flexibility in order to where you want people to be receiving the messages, having some modular signage is a great solution. It allows for you to be able to keep your space flowing, but still keep the interaction of people coming and going nice and smooth. Again, another example of some signage that can be moved in order to keep traffic flow going. We've got some other ones just again for keeping confidence. I mean, we tend to always think of information around actual buildings and offices and retail spaces, but we often don't think about our vehicles and really creating those confidence interactions with little signage. And so this is a great example of, someone having their car cleaned and then picking it up and having the reassurance that their car has been sanitized, and then any additional information to be able to give that confidence that as that person, as the owner of the car, when you've entered it, you've come into a safe space. Some other visual cues, again, just to reiterate, no one had indicated that stairwells were a concern, and that's probably, I would assume, because a lot of you either don't have stairs or tend to use the elevator more, which is completely fine. I know at our head office at TPH, we have a number of stairwells, and so coming and going from the building, we use our stairwells quite a bit, and so this type of signage for us would be very, very critical. And then again, on the other side, with respect to just visual cues, reminding people to stay home if they're unwell, those are just that reassuring reminders, and making sure that people are abiding by them is critical. So this is a fun one that was shared, an East Coast share by Gary with me, just a fun one with respect to how to keep distance. So thank you, Gary, for that share. And then another one that Gary shared with me that I just thought was fantastic. So just because it's distance signaging, it doesn't mean that it can't be fun and you can't play a little bit with some of the ways in which you communicate. Elevators are a hot topic. This is a good one where not only when you're waiting for an elevator do you know where to stand, but there's also the reminders of how many people can enter and then where you need to stand once you've entered that elevator. So Gary, I'm going to pass this one over to you, and then we can go through a couple of other.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do at Barrington is we help organizations be more productive, more effective, and manage their businesses. And so one of the things these are some of the things that we think about when we think of visual management, and we support a lot of visual management, and we use a lot of the principles that Amy just has shared with you. But when you think about your location, optimizing floor layout, how specific tasks are done. So again, thinking about level work and level two, the instructions for how your staff actually do their work is one way that you can create visual instructions. And another good thing about that is not only creates a more safety environment, but if you have new leadership coming into your organization, they can look at the way it's supposed to be done, look at the behavior of the employees doing the work, and say, do these match? So it becomes a way of you also being able to provide strong leadership. Visualizing standard operating procedures. Again, many of us have organizations that might have what they call an SOP, or standard operating procedure, in a book, a binder somewhere, or it's on a shared point or shared drive full of PDFs that you have to search for. Visualizing your standard operating procedures will create a much more effective and efficient organization that will ensure you have consistency in quality and consistency in the product. We call them performance and indicators, P's and Q's. Inside of any process, any work that you do, there are some very critical points of success that will determine the output of that work. What are they? And how can you visualize those inside your work process? Again, these are kind of things that we do. And-ons, which are really, it's a Japanese term, which really means sort of call for help. So again, if you've got a process, how do you know when that process is working? How do you know when it's not working? You create these visual cues that say this process is working the way it should be, or this process isn't. And Amy's used some examples, and the example of that would be the whole shopping cart thing, right? Amy's in there shopping around without a shopping cart, and the whole idea of the there's a problem is when you run out of shopping carts, your store is full. That's the signal. Supermarkets, often we call them supermarkets, load leveling, first in, first out queues, all of those kinds of things we're starting to see more of, both in organizations and external to organizations. And also departmental signage. When you go into a store specifically a grocery store, you kind of know where to look for the product you're looking for because it's hanging there. And if you want, if you want a certain pastas, well, there's an eye that says pastas. Okay, I go down here for my pastas. But when you come into your business and people come into your business, do they know intuitively where to go to get what they need to get? And so so whether it's a claims department or whether it's, booking or whether it's reservations or whatever it is the departmental signage effective at driving the right behaviors you want from your team? So those are the kinds of things we help you with. And Amy's got an awesome checklist that you can use. So I'll turn it back to you, Amy.
So I just to be mindful of time, so that we have the ability to go through the question period, I just wanted to let everybody know that on our tph.ca website, we have a number of tools that are available to you, and we will be able to send this out after the webinar today. And some of them involve, reopening checklists, so questions that you need to ask yourself, and then what actions do you need to take based on the answers of those questions. So those are just a couple of tools that we have. And so just wanted to, so just with respect to, at this point, we can open it up for any questions you may have. Again, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And we hope that there's been some good information shared. I know that Gary and I ran this webinar not too long ago, and some of the questions we talked about, I answered, were involving some of the placements, and one of the ones, and I realized I didn't mention it earlier, was about, what does eye level mean to you? And when we talked about, too big, too small, too soon, too late, and then there's the too high, too low. So eye level, just to give everybody an idea, eye level is actually, I'm 5 feet tall, my husband's 6 feet tall. So if I were to put everything at my eye level and everything in our home and hanging pictures on the walls, it would look very, very awkward. But in fact, in retail and eye level in general, we've been trained throughout the course of our lives to actually naturally look up to a 72-inch height. So if you're looking to position signage, that eye level is considered 72 inches. And then we had a question based on that, what font size would be recommended. So generally speaking, if you're on the street or people are walking by, anything from 6 to 8 inches in the font size is appropriate. Generally speaking, if it's logos or just critical information. If you're interacting with that signage a little bit more closely, so within a foot or two, going smaller than that is absolutely appropriate. So anyway, I'm going to pass it back to Cindy. Thank you so much, everybody. A little bit information about us. So Cindy, if you want to open it up to questions, that'd be fantastic.
That's great. Thanks so much, Amy and Gary. That was, I found that very, very interesting. A couple of questions that I have, and for all the participants on the line, if you do have a question, then please feel free to type it in the Q&A box. I guess my first is, what do you think has been the biggest change for signage since COVID has happened? It's a loaded question or not. We definitely need more signage now. So how should businesses be reacting to signage now with living through this pandemic?
So one of the things with respect to signage that we found is that because some of the signage that we've been interacting with has been in place for a few months now. I'm not sure if anybody else has noticed, but going to the grocery store, those arrows up and down the aisles are being ignored. And so one of the things that if there's spaces where you feel like you need to refresh just to create that visual cue, again, changing the color and redoing the key signage in just simply just a different color will refresh and re-trigger the brain to know, oh, hey, this is new. I need to act on this again. Because over time, we just start to ignore it. And so we learn this through how a lot of retailers, with respect to their campaigns, they tend to run on either a seasonal campaign or every 6 months. And so there's always an opportunity to refresh the visuals, because what that does is it creates a new visual cue saying, hey, something's new. I'm interested in paying attention. So that's one of the things that we're starting to see is people are starting to find complacency in some of the signage, and they're looking for ways just to better define and refine not only the messaging, but also just to bump up the color in a different capacity.
Interesting, yeah. And on the same note, if you're working in an office building with other offices within the same building, should those businesses come together to have consistent signage? Should it all be the same color? What happens if you're in one kind of area of the building, and then as you move, a different office has different signage? How do you deal with that?
So for me, I think in common spaces, that's a critical thing to have a conversation about, because if you're in one small area and then all of a sudden there's a fundamentally different messaging as soon as you enter another common area, it could get confusing. So coming together to discuss the common areas between those businesses, I think would be a positive. In your own space though, I think keeping it to, your branding, your messaging based on what your business needs are. I think it just resonates with people really well. And you want to create that consistent brand experience, because not everyone's going to have the same, you don't want TD and Canadian Tire all putting their same, competing for their branding on mutual spaces, but you don't want Canadian Tire branding in your TD Bank. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And is it safe to say or kind of assume that every business now needs signage if they don't have it already? Is
yes.
that it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
One thing to note for anybody that has glass doors for entering and exiting, it's very important to know your city or community bylaws, because I know in certain cities there are restrictions, not only whether you're going to put something on the outside of the glass or on the inside of the glass. You need to understand what the rules and regulations are. I know in certain areas of Montreal, you cannot put signage on the outside of glass. But also if you have glass doors entering and exiting, there are some rules and regulations, and I know in the Toronto area at least, that you can't exceed 50% of the glass, and it must be in the lower half of the glass if it's over a certain size. If it's a smaller size, like an 8-inch by 8-inch, it can go at that eye level. But if it's exceeding that, then it creates a health and safety issue as people enter and exit that space.
Interesting. And what would you say would the top 3 signs be that any business would need? What comes to mind right away?
Entering and exiting, and then just how many people can be in that space, and then also just directional signage.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe just one more question, or wondering, is there a key color that businesses should always look at for signage, or is that something that they would work with through their marketing department or through you, or is there kind of that one color that people's eyes are generally drawn to?
So I think the most important thing is the surface that it's going on. And so having a color that will stand out from that surface. If you have a black surface and then you put a dark colored graphic on that dark surface, it's going to blend in. So you want something that has that contrast to whatever surface it's going on. For the most part, at TPH, we have designers in all of our branches, so we are happy to work with anyone and help them with respect to designing signage that's going to work best for their space. But otherwise, your marketing teams definitely can come up with that as well. But I think the key component is, what is the space, what is the lighting in that space, and what's the color of that surface, just so that you can have that contrast.
Okay, I guess our time is up. Wow, I didn't realize we're right here at 11. So, so thank you all so much for joining this webinar, and especially thank you to Amy and Gary, our speakers today. So yes, signs are everywhere and hard to avoid. And so now it's so great that we know a little bit more about what signage that we can use for our businesses, and how to effectively reach out to our customers properly. We hope you've been enjoying our webinar series, and we are getting back to our in-person events here at the Halifax Chamber, including our golf day at Glen Arbor coming up on October 7th for all of you golfers out there, and our Wines on the Waves, a chamber wine and cheese on the Tall Ship Silva, taking place September 18th, so mark your calendars. If you're interested in sponsorship opportunities for any of our upcoming events, you can reach out to our sponsorship specialist, Chris Mann, no relation, at chris@halifaxchamber.com. This webinar was recorded and it will be available to all attendees shortly through YouTube. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.